What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the iLights Creative Podcast. Today, I'm joined by none other than my good friend Shawn Smucker, who is an award-winning novelist. He recently co-authored the book Ignite Your Soul with my mom, Mindy Caliguire, and did an absolutely insane job with it. It's an amazing book, and you guys should totally check it out. You can just look it up on soulcare.com or Amazon. But he's also just become a good friend of mine over the past few years. I met him through my work with Soul Care, and he also is a podcaster and just a fellow creative that I have been super, super grateful to know and be friends with. We first connected, I remember, over the podcast. I think it's called The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling, which is an insane podcast. Some of you guys may have heard that one. It's just really, really freaking well done and covers a crazy story of the author of the Harry Potter books. But him and I are both big nerds on that podcast, and I remember talking with him for a long time about that and just getting hyped on it with him. And ever since that moment, we've been really good friends. He also, funny enough, was the guy that inspired me to start my Substack. He's been on Substack for a long time and has a pretty solid following on there. So highly recommend checking him out on there. He blogs at least once a week, I believe, on there. And then he also publishes his podcast on there as well. Anyway, I'm going to stop being long-winded here. I think you're really going to enjoy today's conversation. And without further ado, this is my conversation with Shawn Smucker. Dude, I'd love to know first, just how are you doing? How's Monday going?
Monday's good. Yeah, Monday is the one day that our bookstore is closed. So, we bought this bookstore 6 months ago. And so Mondays are kind of like just get stuff done around the house, get some random check marks ticked on the to-do list, and
like a podcast,
try and get some work done. But yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Cool. So it's open 6 days a week?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, great. Did you guys have a good weekend there?
Yeah, we had a great weekend. Yeah, things are picking up in the fall. We had we opened in May, June, July, August were great. September was a little slow, but we weren't around a lot. We have some other business stuff that we do the month of September. And then we were actually in Hawaii. Miley's dad passed away about 2 months ago, and he was born and raised in Hawaii. And so his memorial service was over there. So we were there for about 5 days. So it was just like the 6 weeks from mid-August to end of September were pretty nuts. And now we're kind of finding our way again at the store and life. Yeah.
So is it like as the weather gets worse, the cozy vibes in the bookstore get better and people end up finding their way in there more often?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think September's hectic for everybody with getting back to school and trying to figure out new schedules and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, definitely. I mean, fall here has just been beautiful this year. A lot of sunshine, a lot of chilly days. And so people are out walking a lot. A lot of people travel to Lancaster. Lancaster's becoming a bigger destination for like weddings. There's a ton of cool wedding venues. People come here. We're within shooting distance of like Pittsburgh, New York City, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Philadelphia. Someone told me recently that within a 3-hour drive of Lancaster, there's about 40 or 50% of the U.S.'s population is within a 3-hour drive of Lancaster.
What?
Yeah, which is crazy.
Wait, that's an insane statistic.
Yeah. So you have New York City, you have all of New Jersey, you have most of Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia. So yeah, so it's a huge destination. People come here a lot on the weekends, and so we're starting to see that, like people coming in for the leaves, and the city's such a bustling little city. I mean, there's just like 60,000 people that live here, but when you drive through, it's just there's always something going on. So it's a fun little place to have a business.
Yeah, cool. Well, tell me. So your bookstore is called Nooks. Tell me a little bit more. Has it been like 6 months since you guys stepped in and became the owners there?
Yeah, it's been about 6 months. Yep.
Very cool. Yeah, dude, tell me about that experience. What have been the highlights and the lowlights of being a bookstore owner?
Well, I mean, the store itself is amazing, and Miley and I are such huge fans of books and reading, and we're both writers, and so stories are such a huge part of our lives that the bookstore is. I mean, I could easily be in there all day, every day, and not get tired of it. I think but there are other parts of our lives too, and so that's kind of been the main challenge is just figuring out how to incorporate this bookstore into a life of having 6 kids, and I still write full time, co-write and ghostwrite for other people,
Including my mom.
Yeah, including your mom.
Yep.
We still have a house to take care of and a dog to take care of, and it just so I think that's been the biggest challenge is how do we find some sort of sustainable life with a new business that needs a lot of our time.
Yeah. So your calendar just looks like crazy. Just spaghetti.
Yeah, it's a little nuts right now. I mean, yeah, I've got a good friend from college who's on sabbatical from his work. He's got 2 months on sabbatical, and we've been trying to get together for weeks now, and it's just hard. It's hard.
I hate
we
that
really
feeling.
when we're not at the store, we really want to be with our kids, because
Right.
they're the ones who have felt our absence probably the most, and so. It has been a situation of sort of paring away a lot of unnecessary activities and stuff that we just don't have time for right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so you mentioned like you not only is this bookstore like sort of a source of income for you guys and it's work for you, but it seems to be like an environment, a space that you really just deeply appreciate and just love being in. Will you just walk me through like a day in Nooks? Just what it's like being in there, and what are the things that make you feel like just it's one of your favorite places to be?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite day to work in there actually is on a Sunday. I'll head in about 9:30, park at the parking garage across the street, unlock, turn on the lights, put the board sign out. I love Sundays because there are a lot of families walking around the city on Sunday mornings, just going out for brunch or coffee, and so they swing by, dragging their strollers and schlepping their kid gear into the store, and it's just I love chatting with people about books. I mean, one of my favorite questions to ask is, have you read anything recently that you love? What are your favorite books of all time? Those are the kinds of things that a lot of people just want to stand and talk about for a long time. I think books, for a lot of us, books are one of the best things in life. And so when you find someone else who feels that way and you can just, throw out some of your favorite books. So that's great. And then I love putting in the weekly order. Like Miley and I love putting in the weekly order and see what we sold the week before. And
That's super cool.
We carry so many of our favorite books. And so, at the end of a week to look back and see, oh my gosh, we sold like every single one of my top 5 favorite books this week. Like that's,
wow.
It's just really cool.
Yeah. Well, so how would you answer that question if someone Uno reversed you and they're like, what have been the books that have marked you the most and have been your favorite throughout your life?
I mean, my standard sort of top 3 are John Steinbeck's East of Eden, which is just a classic and one that I loved. There was a book that I read my freshman year in an English seminar class, as sort of an intro to English class, called A Prayer for Owen Meany by John Irving, which is just an unbelievable book on faith. Even though it's not, he's not a Christian author, it delves into like, what does it mean to believe? And so that book is amazing.
Okay.
And then there's a book called The Brothers K by David James Duncan, which has some sort of similar themes and jumps off of the Brothers Karamazov, but is really a story about this Midwest family in the 50s and 60s that gets swept up in a few different things. One, the father is a minor league baseball player, so there's a lot of baseball in it, and he's just sort of like this player who can't quite get to the next level. And then there's an accident that takes him out of baseball. And And then as the boys grow older, they're coming of age during Vietnam. And so one of the brothers gets swept up into Vietnam, and it's just such an incredibly powerful story. So, I mean, those are the three that, that have meant a lot to me through the years. But more recently, I mean, This Is Happiness by Niall Williams is amazing. Remarkably Bright Creatures is a super fun story. There's just so many good books out there. And so it's, that's probably the funnest part, is to sit down with someone and try and determine, okay, well, those are my favorite books, but they might not be your favorite books. So what do you like? What are books that you've read? And then, sort of take their tastes and try and match them with another book that they're going to love. That's so much fun.
Yeah. So part of your criteria with Nooks of which books are going to be featured prominently in there is just, what do you love? Is there any other criteria? Like how do you go about deciding what books you want to feature and what books don't get featured in Nooks?
We're always trying to find books that we're always going to have in the store, So like, we're not the kind of store that if you want the newest book, or the latest drop, like we probably are not going to have it. We might have it. We have, a handful of brand new books that we've heard stuff about that we think match up with our tastes and stuff. But for the most part, we're always looking for books that are going to be in our store for a long time. And so they're either our favorites, or they're people whose taste that we trust, friends of ours who tell us, hey, this book's amazing, I love this book. Those are the kinds of books that we bring into the store and that we end up keeping in the store.
Cool. And so if I were to walk it, like, I've never been to Nooks before and I would love to one day, but like, do you guys have like little like nooks, like reading areas for people to sit? Do you guys serve coffee? Like what's kind of the vibe in there? Because I know community is such a big piece of why you do it, because you love talking and meeting in person around stuff. So like, what's the atmosphere in there like?
So it really was started before we took over. It was started as primarily a children's bookstore. So it has a very whimsical feel, very sort of, just like very imaginative. The kids' book area is awesome because a ton of the kids' books are all face out on the wall. So we have like super narrow shelves where the books just sit propped, kind of like pictures. Yeah. And so that adds to the beauty of the room. But there is like a tiny little closet with like bean bags in it where you can sit and read. And we're currently working on the third room back, and we're going to add more like comfy chairs and spots like that. So it's a mix of, trying to get as many books into the space as we can, but also being mindful of, like you're saying, creating those little nooks where people can sit, where they can take a look at a book, where they can stop and breathe for a minute. Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a perfect name. Like, I feel like it just encapsulates the feeling that you want when you're reading something really sick. Is you just got to find like a little nook.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I used to, we lived in this farmhouse, and I would, every night, especially in the summer, because we didn't have air conditioning, and that house got so hot, I would sleep right in front of a box fan. And these fans are not like today's fans that you get at like Walmart or whatever are super cheap, all plastic, that's not the box fan that we had. Was like heavy duty. You did not want to get a finger or anything in that fan because it would take it right off.
Industrial strength fan.
Exactly. And I would drape a sheet, like kind of get a sheet stuck to the fan somehow, and it would create this dome. And that's where I would sleep at night. And so like I would sleep in there with like a flashlight and a book. And that was like my spot, man. Growing up, that was every single night, just in the fan,
no wonder you
dome,
fell in love with reading. You had like the vibiest little reading nook ever. It reminds me of like in elementary school when you have like that big parachute thing that like everyone like kind of like flips up, and then it's like a little bubble. It's like you just created like a little like dome for you. That's like crazy.
Yep. Yeah.
It's such a fun little spot to read.
That was it. Yeah.
Very cool. Something that strikes me as really like interesting for someone who like is like professionally a writer and also now owns like a brick and mortar bookstore is how much the world has changed in 30 years. or less really, and how obviously like Amazon dominates the book sales world and really the selling of everything world, and just how digital everything is, and how even as far as like human connection goes, like I think Zoom calls and video games and all like FaceTime has replaced a lot of face-to-face human interaction. I guess I just find it interesting that you're someone who's investing in some of these more like tactile and almost like old school ways of doing things. Do you like, I guess I'm curious how you see and what your perception is of this world that's changing with all of this digitalization happening, and even with like AI now coming in and being such a huge force of copywriting in the world. Do you kind of just have this old school mindset of like sort of the in-person old way of doing things is better? I guess, how do you understand all of these big changes that are happening, and how does that impact you as a business owner and a writer?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I'll give you sort of a general thought, and then I'll give you a specific way that it's played out. So like my general thought is, I just hope that we're careful. Like I hope that we're thoughtful about the way that we embrace these new technologies. I think you look at the grocery store, right? Like 15 years ago, you went in the grocery store, you got your cart full of stuff, you checked out, you talked to the cashier, you left. I don't ever go to the cashier lines. Like I am such a huge, like I always go to the self-checkout, right?
For sure.
But I'm starting to sort of question, why do I do that? Like, cause every time I go through the line, not every time, but half of the time if I go through the regular line with a real cashier, I'll end up having a conversation with that person.
Totally.
And it becomes a connection point, in my life, even briefly for a moment. It's not like I see them again ever, but I think that we just have to be careful about eliminating every single one of these connection points, that we have in life with people. Yeah. And also, like what kind of a world do we want? Like what kind of a world do we want? And I think a lot of times our short-term decisions don't always line up with our long-term desires. Like, it's so much easier for me just to get a book off of Amazon, right? And that's what I did for years. It was like, well, I'll get it tomorrow. Like, I don't feel like waiting. I can have it instantly. But now that I have a bookstore, I realize, and not just for selfish reasons, I just realize like that's not necessarily the kind of world that I want. Like I want a world with shops that I can go into and actually talk with people, especially around things that I find important, things that I love. Yeah. And so like specifically, I think the way this has worked out, and this is maybe a little bit of a tangent, but like Miley and I realized pretty quickly that our business is not simply having a bookstore, Yeah. Like that's part of it, but it's not the main part. Because if we're just talking about selling books, like we can't compete. We can't compete with Amazon or any online retailer. Yeah. We can't have, it is insane if you think about the fact that you can go online and have any single book that you want basically within a day or two. Like that is completely nuts.
It is.
And there's no way that we can come close to that. Like even if we order a book for somebody, it's going to take a day or two to get to us. It's going to take 3 to 5 days to get to them. Yeah. So like we can't try and compete at the bookstore level, but we don't run just a bookstore. Like we run a community connection place. Like we have customers who come in and have asked Miley, a young girl asked Miley with tears in her eyes, like, do you have a novel that you could recommend for someone who's going through a hard breakup? And just a couple days ago, she had a woman say, my husband died a month ago, and I need a book that's going to help me get through this. And in both of those instances, Miley had extensive conversations with them, and they probably looked at 10 different books. What about this? Well, what do you think about this? Or, And that's not the kind of thing that you get online. Like you don't get that in a search bar. You don't get that from AI. Like I think, and I guess coming back to my original point, like I hope that we're mindful of, I'm not anti-technology. I'm not anti-advancement. Like I think all this stuff, it can be really cool.
Yeah.
But I just think we have to be careful that we're not sort of swept up in the coolness of it and like the flashiness of it and like, wow, we can do this. Isn't this incredible that this is possible? And that in all of that, we end up losing, a place like Nooks or 1,000 other places that can't compete maybe at a capitalist level with what technology can do.
Yeah. Yeah. In a way, I feel like there's a parallel with churches here too, of how like now you can get the best teaching, some of the best theology, some of the best wisdom on YouTube from anywhere, best worship experience. You can throw it on and have it in your living room and have a genuinely amazing experience with that. And I think a lot of like churches are starting to realize too, it's like, oh, maybe like the only thing that we can really provide that's like better is not necessarily like the product or like this experience, but it's just the connection around those things in person.
Yeah.
Which I think is beautiful. And I remember seeing, I think it was on Instagram, you were posting, maybe I actually read about it on Substack. I think you were really good at documenting your first few like weeks and months at Nooks on Substack. But you had like some opening parties and you had just all kinds of different gatherings around not just the bookstore, but also your journey with it and your story of taking over it and becoming a big part of it. So I loved seeing that. And I think it's really special that you guys have a heart to do that. And I'm curious, like, are there any other ways that you guys, now that you, like you said, you see yourselves really as a space providing connection around the books, not just the books themselves. Are there anything that are there any things you have a vision for with Nooks that you want to continue to build to create that sense of connection around books other than just being physically there?
Yeah, well, along those lines, it's interesting to me, one of the things I think is most concerning about our society is just how polarized we've become. Everyone's like getting pushed further and further away. The algorithms sort of feed us more and more of what we think we already believe. And so we become more and more entrenched in those things. And what I love about Nooks, and I think what we miss out on when we don't have these in-person spaces, is the ability to share space with people who we think we despise or who we think like, I can't imagine ever talking with someone like that. Like I can't imagine talking with, a hardcore Democrat or a hardcore Republican. Like I can't imagine being friends with them, et cetera, et cetera. But we've had events where I know some of the people in the audience, and they don't know each other. And I know that online, they probably hate each other. Like online, they probably would end up, on Facebook, like arguing or like posting completely different things. But they come to this event and they sit there and they listen to an author read from their book. And then they ask questions and they're able to hear each other speak. And I really think that that's what's missing a lot in our society is this opportunity. It's almost like a watering hole, right? Where like people can just come together, get what they need, rub shoulders, realize they're not enemies. And so that I think is one of the amazing things that we've seen. And I think is something that these in-person spaces, it's why they're so important.
So when there's an author that'll come out with like a new book, you guys will do like a book release event type thing at Nooks?
Yeah. So we've had, our first one was Lisa Jo Baker. Her book, her memoir is amazing. It's called It Wasn't Roaring, It Was Weeping. And it's about growing up with a father who was very angry and very verbally abusive. And she's South African, so she kind of grew up during apartheid and all that. And then moved to the United States and then saw, the racial divides here. And so she just writes so beautifully about her experience. So she came out, we had like 35, 40 people. It was just such a fun night, such a cool thing. And it's neat, I think, for authors as well to be able to be in a space where they can talk with their readers. Because it's not such a huge crowd that there's like a separateness to it. So
Yeah.
So that was great. And then we've just had, we probably had, I don't know, 7 or 8 other authors come through over the last few months. And we just love those events so much. We love it. Like it's so neat to be able to facilitate an evening where an author can share their work and people can feel like, hey, this person's like right here in front of me. They get to ask questions and have conversations, and it's really a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, dude. I honestly wish I could have been there for some of these. They sound like just magical. Even like the Ignite Your Soul book release, which you ghost wrote with my mom. Unfortunately, living in Hawaii does not provide a ton of opportunities to make it to stuff like that. But it just looked like such a special event. And it's cool because it's like, not only is it the relationships that people are like connecting around, but it's the ideas presented in this book. And that's one of the things I've always thought was so fascinating about like churches and conferences and public speaking event is like just this concept that like humans will every once in a while choose to physically gather around a conversation around just certain ideas. I think that's just like a beautiful thing. Like I just have realized that like humans are very unique in that way, where you never see a group of gorillas like crowding around another gorilla that's like sharing what they think about like the stars or something like that. You don't see ants like in some sort of like little ant colony having like a little debate around an idea. I just think it's beautiful that like there's this physical gathering that humans will do around ideas.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. And I love the way you put that, because we had, for example, we had Micah Boyette come out a week ago, 2 weeks ago, and her recent book is called Blessed Are the Rest of Us. And it's about raising her son with Down syndrome and like what that was like, getting the diagnosis, when he was born, how he's interacted with their other kids, how he's changed their view of success, changed their view of hustle culture, of, what does it mean to have a disability, all these things. And so then she gets to come in front of us, many of us who don't have, kids with special needs, some who did, some who didn't, and describe her experience. And in her description, suddenly I'm starting to see, oh, wow, like this is how her story relates with mine, and this is how I can be a better person, a better parent, a better spouse. This is how I can be a better support to folks with special needs. Like there were just so many things that come out of this short, like reading her book and then sitting down for an hour and chatting with her. And so to be able to facilitate stuff like that on a regular basis, like you said, what a unique thing, what a cool thing, just to sit down for an evening and talk about an idea, talk about art, talk about beauty, talk about a novel. Like it is really, really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I'm curious with the kind of frantic pace that you guys have been running, especially with this fall, and now hopefully things are chilling out a little bit. Are there any projects that you now are turning to now that there's a little bit more margin and time? Are you currently working on any novels or books? Like what's kind of the next project for you, if there is one? Yeah,
so I've got about 3 things going for clients that take up most of my time. And then, with that in the bookstore, I'm pretty full at the moment, but I have a novel that I started about 1.5 years ago. And I really would like to, I just need to get back into it on a regular basis. Even, I was just talking with a friend of mine about this actually, before I got on the call with you, just how important it is to incorporate even the smallest bits of time into those personal projects. Like even if I'm only writing a couple hundred words a day, I think it's hard for me to get back into it because I'm used to pre-bookstore when I could write 1,000 words a day on my own stuff. Like I would work for the morning on my client's work, and then in the afternoon I would just, 1,000 words, 1,500 words on my own novel. And that's just not possible right now. I just don't have that kind of time. And so I need to get back to being okay with just a small bit here, but on a consistent basis. Because one of Miley and I's favorite authors is Kate DiCamillo. She wrote The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane. She, she's written a ton of books for like middle school age kids, and they're just beautiful, beautiful books. And at the back of one of her books in her biography, she says, Kate DiCamillo lives in Minnesota where she faithfully writes 250 words a day. And this is somebody who's won 3 Newbery Awards. Like, I think she's won more Newbery Awards than anybody else ever. And she writes 200 words a day. Like, you can write 200 words in probably 8 minutes. Like, if you just sit down and write.
Wow.
But the thing is, like, 200 words a day, 1,000 words a week, that's a novel a year. It's just about doing the small things on a consistent basis for a long period of time. And it's amazing, like, when it comes to writing specifically, what you can actually accomplish when you're consistent. It's not that you have to write 5,000 words a day, but if you consistently write, then it starts to add up.
Yeah. I feel that really deeply about journaling too, where it's like, I'll go through seasons of my life where, because my standard of what I want a journal entry to look like is so high, I won't journal for 6 months, you know?
Yeah.
And that's always the grind, is like, you have this ideal of what a creative effort looks like. And then when you realize you don't have capacity for that, or you don't feel like you can do that, you just don't for so long. But then it's like so funny how, especially with writing, if I just give myself the freedom to be like, hey, I can open a journal page or start a new Word document, and if I get 10 words out, that's all I need. That's a win.
Yeah.
Those are like, when I give myself that freedom, those are the days where it's like, I'll write 10 pages because
exactly.
It's like, I put none of
exactly.
that pressure on myself. And it's just so funny how much the mind can like play games around those sort of creative inputs.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Dude, I've really loved, you've actually been really inspiring to me as far as getting on Substack goes, and seeing that as like a really important platform. And since I've started my own Substack, I've been like kind of pushing a significant number of my friends to do it as well. So I've probably had like 4 or 5 other friends that have like joined it as well. And you were really sort of like one of the first people that I knew that was on that platform and valued it. And actually that's where I've been posting all of these podcast episodes, is YouTube and on Substack, just because I kind of see it as an interesting pocket of the internet that hasn't really become some of the shitstorm type things that a lot of other social medias have. So I'd love to hear like what your journey of discovering Substack is, and what place you see it having in all of your writing, because there's so many different places you can input. Medium was a big thing for a while. People have email newsletters. Like, what is it about Substack that's sort of attracted you, and what has your story or journey been on there?
I think what I like about Substack is that it's this great marrying of like a newsletter, but also a subscriber model. So, you can write a post that goes out to people, but then it's also, it remains available for anyone who stumbles upon it, or if someone shares the link, or if they want to read back through the things you've written before. Like, all of that's still there. So, when I was sending out a newsletter by, MailChimp or whatever, that was pretty limited to the people who signed up for that newsletter. And then once it went out, it was kind of like, well, it's out, Whereas
were you doing that for a long time?
Yeah, I was. I mean, I was with MailChimp for years. And then they just got super expensive, there were some things that sort of came into play there, and it wasn't easy to monetize, to give people access. So then a lot of people were going through Patreon, but that was sort of, I don't know, it just all felt a little clunky. Yeah. Whereas Substack just feels really streamlined. You go on, you write the post, you schedule it, it goes out to your subscribers, it sits there available as if on a website. Like, I like the different ways that you can use it. Yeah.
How did you discover it? Did you have other friends that had been on it first?
Yeah. So Tish Oxenrider was on there, and my friend Seth Haynes moved his stuff over there. And I just kind of got curious about what that might look like to actually be able to have paying subscribers, and so, yeah. And I'm kind of a numbers guy, so it's fun to see like, oh wow, this post, really seemed to resonate with people, and I got a lot more subscribers. So this one, wasn't really that read or shared or whatever. So it's kind of fun to play around, and you have all that back end information to explore too. So that makes it fun.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really cool. I've started to realize that like a really nice flow for ideas, like to sort of test ideas, test something to write about, and then create like more long form is like, I think it's Alex Hormozy was the one who first I heard this from, was like, put out tweets, like a bunch of like little tiny tweets, just a couple sentences of ideas, and almost see that as like a little just document ideas that are coming to your brain journey. And then you also get really fast feedback on like some of those will take off, some of those will get a bunch of engagement, and then you get to take those ones and then extrapolate in a podcast or a long blog, like a long blog or even a book. Yeah. And I just like, even on Substack, there's that cool like notes feature where it's like kind of the same thing. You can almost have like little tweet type content. And then if you see that starting to really resonate with people, then you can like sort of draw that out into a long form post, which I really love. And
yeah. And the other thing I really like about Substack is it feels much less algorithmy than Facebook, Twitter, than the other sort of social media stuff right now that just constantly elevates the most, whatever is the most controversial, whatever generates the most anger, whatever gets people worked up the most, like that's the stuff that shows up in all of our feeds. And it just doesn't feel that way with Substack. It feels much more, just kind of go with the flow. Like it doesn't feel like they're trying to, because they're making money through subscriptions. There's not that, they don't have to generate ad revenue. There aren't ads. Different. So, so there isn't this pressure put on the site itself to get clicks or to get eyeballs on stuff. Like it's just sort of, it's much more organic as far as what's showing up on my feed. It's what my friends are interested in. It's what they've been sharing. It's what they've been liking. Yeah. It's not just like, oh, look at this. This is crazy. This is really going to get you steaming,
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So I guess I haven't checked up in a little while, but what frequency do you put out posts on Substack with? Is it once a week?
I try and do weekly, yeah. So like August and September, I wasn't very consistent, but I've kind of gotten back. I'm trying to get back into the weekly, and then we also have a Substack for the Bookstore for Nooks, and so we just try and write, something personal, and then bring in like 2 or 3 books that have kind of been on our radar, either books we've read or books customers are talking about, that sort of thing.
Cool. And have you seen most of like the best engagement and most growth? Like, has that mostly just been through like kind of that day in, day out, like just being consistent? Or like what have you found to be the most helpful as far as getting reach on there?
Because it's not generated by level of angst, or I think you have to get people invested. So the stuff for me that's worked the most is when people share it. It's just simply based on shares. So I see like a big jump if I'm writing something that resonates. Now, when we got the Bookstore in May and I started writing about that, I saw a jump at that point. And so I think people want to live vicariously in situations that they find interesting, or and so so the Bookstore, I think, took me up a level or two as far as engagement and subscribers and all that kind of stuff. There's
this interesting connection I've seen that I feel like as a business owner, like in a creative agency, it's something that I try to help people with, is this idea that like when you tell really good stories, it affords you the opportunity to live really good stories, because storytelling will pull you into all kinds of crazy scenarios. And then as you live a crazier story, you have crazier stories to tell. And there's this really funny feedback loop. And that's like a really interesting thing with social media too, is like people get into these upward spirals where it's like you went on one cool trip to Mexico that was super expensive and it cost you everything, but you brought a camera and told the story the entire way. And maybe you had some crazy adventure happen, and because of that, like, it got all this traction online. And then because you have all this traction online, you can maybe get support, and there's opportunities and open doors to go do something even bigger. And it's just this interesting upward spiral. And there's this crazy connection between, like, when you tell a good story and it resonates and it hits a nerve online, all of a sudden a bunch of other big stories will open up to you. And I feel like you opening Nooks is like a perfect example of that. It's like all of a sudden it's like something really worth doing is happening in your life, and people are like, not that you haven't been doing things worth doing your whole life, but it's more tangible. People are like, oh, this guy's going into this risky entrepreneurial thing. He has 6 kids. Like, there's this brand new story unfolding, and it grabs this attention. And then once you have that attention, it's like, oh my gosh, okay, well, I guess there's more doors, there's more momentum towards things. And that's, I think, one of the craziest parts of the internet is, like, you can have these wild upward spirals that happen in people's lives.
Yeah, for sure. So, like, back in 2012, we went on a cross-country trip for 4 months in a big blue bus that had been converted into a camper. It was Miley and I and our 4 oldest kids at that point. They were ages like 8, or how old was Cade? He would have been 9, and our youngest then would have been Sam, and he was like 2 or 3. Mm-hmm. And when we hit the road, I mean, we suddenly had, at that point I was blogging, and my traffic went way up at the blog, because everybody wants to follow along and do that kind of stuff. And so that was amazing. But that was something that Miley and I really decided on probably 15 years ago, was that we just wanted to start to say yes to things. And, if an adventure presented itself, like, we wanted to say yes and do it, and, deal with the fallout. Like, if things didn't work out, if things went sideways, we would figure it out. But we just felt like saying yes to things was something that we wanted to do. And so it started with that. I mean, and then some of the clients that I had, like, I spent 3 weeks in Istanbul with a client. I spent 10 days in northern Iraq when ISIS was, like, on the move.
What?
And these were all things that, I mean, what's that?
When was that?
That was in, oh man, I have to look back. It was like 2015, maybe 2014.
Was it like a journalism
probably
thing?
It was a book for a client. So she had created an organization called Reload Love, and they took spent bullet casings and made jewelry out of it. And all the money that they raised, they would build playgrounds in places where children were impacted by terror. So they had built playgrounds in Jordan. They had built playgrounds in the Far East, and they were in the middle of building playgrounds in northern Iraq. And so we went over. We were in Mosul when Iraq was just on, or when ISIS was just on the other side of the river. We had to have the night before I left. I got an email, and I was in bed. Miley was almost asleep beside me, and she looked over and saw this email that I had got, and I had to take a test. I basically had to do a course on improvised explosive devices and, like, what roadside mines would look like, and to make sure that I didn't, like, walk into a mine. And so those were the kinds of things that we had to do before we went on the trip, and the stuff that we saw was just unbelievable. But yeah, I mean, you're right. Like, you can't create content. And that's the hard thing as a writer, because you need to be in the room writing, obviously. But you're not, it's hard to create content eventually if all you're doing is sitting in a room and writing. And so we got to get out there. There are things that, present opportunities that present themselves, and we need to say yes. And so that's what Miley and I've tried to do through the years. Yeah.
There's that interesting, like, sort of input output balance and cycle that you have of, like, you kind of write your brains out and then you're just kind of empty, and so you need to go live and have kind of crazy stuff happen to you and avoid landmines, hopefully. Right. That's wild. Oh shoot, I had a question that it slipped my mind. Well, I think it's fascinating, like, the world of writing and copywriting. Like, you guys are kind of, writers are the original content creators, right? That have been around for thousands and thousands of years. And now all of a sudden we have all these new mediums. and video has really become dominant. First it was pictures, and then really the internet became very video focused. But it seems that writing still has like a very interesting space. Like to me in 2024, the fact that Substack is kind of popping off as a platform tells me that writing still is kind of foundational to the content world and is super important. And it seems like you've very much focused on written word as like the focus of your entire life. I guess I'm wondering like what has caused you to choose that as the focus and to not you're obviously not as much of a visual person. Photos and videos are less of like you obviously use them in your storytelling with Substack and everything like that. But what is your conviction with written word? Why does it feel like that's the thing for you?
That's a great question. I think it's just something that I've loved for my whole life. You know, mm-hmm. I think there's something really challenging. Wallace Stegner writes a little bit about this in one of his books, but there's something really challenging about how do I take this image that's in my head and then using words cause the same image or some similar image to appear in your head, you know, like it's not me showing you saying, here, look at this. This is what I'm showing you. It's not me creating a movie where you see, like we're seeing the same thing, you know, like if I direct a movie and then produce it, engineer it and show it, and then we sit down and watch it together, we're literally seeing and hearing the same thing.
Yeah.
I think there's something always that's been really appealing to me or intriguing to me about this idea of when you write a book or you write something, what I'm trying to do is to recreate in your head what I'm experiencing or the story that I'm feeling.
Yeah.
And I understand that never happens. Like I never,
true.
You can never actually do that, you know, like 100%. So like all the novels that I've written, I know that no one sees in their head exactly what I see in my head.
Right.
But I think it's just the challenge of using detail, and telling that story to try at least to convey that to someone else. That just blows my mind that someone could do that, you know, that Steinbeck could write East of Eden and that story could blow me away, you know, even though I'm sure I don't see Adam Trask the same way that he did in his mind. And I don't see Kathy, you know, the most evil antagonist ever created. I don't see her the same way that he did, but he did a good enough job of telling that story that it's stuck with me for decades, you know? And I think it's that challenge maybe that has always just kind of keeps me going, keeps me trying to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also why I think when a movie comes out after a book series has been created, it very profoundly changes what that means. You know, like Harry Potter was something very different before the movies came out.
Yeah.
You and I are both like big Rick Rubin fans. I know we've gone back and forth like sharing quotes of his, and I feel like I've been listening back through the Creative Act, and there's a chapter where he talks about like that's one of the best parts of art is that it is powerful because you can't create that exact same image in someone's brain, and their experience of your art is just as real and important and is like really the reason you're creating something just as much as it is your own interpretation of it.
Yes.
And yeah, it's so people have always said, you know, it's like a lot of times people say like, you know, the movie ruined the books for me. Like that's such a common thing that people say. It's very uncommon for people to say like, oh, the movie made the books even better, because typically like it is best to let your imagination paint the whole picture for you.
I think they're just such different forms, you know. I feel like we compare them because obviously, you know, we want to try and make a movie out of a book that we love, and that totally makes sense that we would try and do that, but they're just completely different forms, and I think really to compare them is it's apples and oranges. But I huge Rick Rubin fan, and I think Well, yeah, no, I think it is interesting that like you're saying, when most people compare movies and books, they prefer the book. But I think so many times that's because with the book, we were able in our heads to create this world to look like whatever we wanted. Mm-hmm. And so then when a director comes along, they have to make choices about, what's the setting? What do these characters look like? How are they going to talk? What scenes are we going to choose out of this entire book to create this movie? And so I think in some ways it takes this expansive, imaginative thing that lived in our heads, and it creates something tangible out of it that could never be the same. That could never measure up to this sort of nebulous thing that we have in our minds.
Yeah, that's so real. Dang. Well, Shawn, it's we're kind of at time here, and I just want to say again, I'm really grateful for you being here. There's such a, beyond like all of your wisdom and like really brilliant ideas about writing and everything, I feel like something I take from you is just you have this very peaceful presence, and you have this you're very rooted in stillness, which I think is such a, even though your life is chaotic and you have such a busy calendar, when I talk to you and when I'm with you, I feel this sense that time is ticking by at half speed. And I think I've felt that in your writing, and in the like detail that you put into stories and into the way that you really like savor moments. So I just want to say, like, dude, thanks for being who you are. And yeah, I've loved all the things that you've shared in your writing. And again, I'm really grateful for your willingness to be on this podcast. And yeah, dude, all the things you've shared, I feel like there's so much that I'll be pondering for a while. So
well,
yeah.
Thanks, John. And I really appreciate you pointing out Rick Rubin to me, because I'm pretty sure that I first saw the videos that you had shared on Instagram,
oh,
just
really?
like the little clips of him. I think so.
Okay, cool.
And so I really appreciate that. But also, man, your enthusiasm, and I'm just excited to see where your imagination and creativity and everything leads you to. So all the best.
Thanks, dude. Yeah, we'll talk soon, Shawn.
All right. Sounds good.
Cheers, buddy.